I would just ask everybody to mute yourselves. So my name is Paul Wolf. I serve as president of the New York Coalition for Open Government. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to addressing transparency in government. We issue a couple reports throughout the year where we kind of track compliance with the open meetings law and the Freedom of Information law. We have regular monthly meetings via Zoom. We have members from all across the state, and we certainly encourage those who are here for the first time to check out some of our meetings and join us. Our website is at nyopenGov.org, and you can follow us also on Facebook and Twitter. So this week is Sunshine Week, and Sunshine Week began in 2005. It's something that's celebrated across the country. And March 16th, the week of March 16th is when it's celebrated, which is today, actually. And it's James Madison's birthday, our fourth president. And James Madison was a big proponent of First Amendment, free speech, free press. And that is why we celebrate Sunshine Week on this day and this week. And it's just all across the country, newspapers, reporters celebrating the importance of a free press and an open government. So we always try to do an event during this week, and that's this one, where we're going to go over some of the highlights of the open meetings law and the Freedom of Information law. So the plan is I have some PowerPoint slides that'll take me about 20-25 minutes to go through, and then we'll open it up to questions. Plan is to end at noon, but I'm happy to stay longer if there are more questions, but just to give people an idea of time frame. So now let me see if I can share my screen and pull up my PowerPoint, which sometimes I have issues doing. So, okay, let's see. Ooh,
we got it.
Just gotta click start slideshow. So hopefully everybody can see that, right? All right, so a little bit about myself. As I said, I'm president of the coalition, but I am an advocate for open government as a citizen, but I've also been on the other side of the table. I served as chief of staff to the Buffalo Common Council for 4 years. I was an attorney at the Buffalo Housing Authority, Erie County Department of Social Services. So in those positions, I would deal with open meeting law issues, Freedom of Information law issues. I would have to actually process FOIL requests at the Housing Authority. So I have experience on both sides of the table, which I think is helpful when dealing with these issues. As I said, our group is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. And whoops, I didn't want to do that, but here we are. So let's talk about the open meetings law. So this is the definition for the open meetings law. And the part in bold was recently added just in the past year. But basically, the open meetings law applies to public bodies. And public bodies are entities that consist of 2 or more members that perform a governmental function. So clearly, your village board, your town board, city council, county legislature, planning board, zoning board, school board, industrial development agency. There are many groups that are subject to the open meetings law. There are a lot that aren't, a lot of nonprofit groups. People kind of automatically assume, well, what do you mean you're getting a lot of public funding even though you're a nonprofit? Not necessarily subject to the open meetings law. A lot of discussion and debate about committees. Committees in general that have advisory power only are not typically subject to the open meetings law, but there are exceptions. It really depends on who is serving on the committee. A committee that consists of all elected officials or government officials That's subject to the open meetings law. There's been opinions that say basically if there's two or more elected officials or government officials, that makes a committee, even if it's advisory, subject to the open meetings law. So there's a lot of arguments, discussions, and debates about committees, and that's something we continue to deal with, something hopefully we can address in the law. Even things like, it's come up recently, charter revision commissions. Charter revision commissions have only advisory power, but they are subject to the open meetings law because charter revision commissions, their power comes from a state law, a state act, and there are opinions that makes them subject to the open meetings law. So just something to be aware of. In general, you know, your typical government body with elected officials is subject to it. Committees gets a little bit of a grayer area. Next, you have to have notice for any public meeting or any body that's subject to the open meetings law. So for a meeting scheduled at least a week in advance, you have to give at least 72 hours notice. And that should be through a news release, putting it up on the website. Maybe there's a bulletin board at town hall. For a meeting scheduled less than a week in advance, sometimes public bodies will call, you know, an emergency meeting or a quick meeting. Well, our favorite phrase, not really in the law, is to the extent practicable. Well, they have to give notice as best as they can. I think, you know, this is certainly subject to great abuse. You see it sometimes. A press release goes out on Friday afternoon for a Monday morning meeting. Don't like that. You know, why are we doing that? Sometimes it's being done purposefully to hide things. It certainly makes people suspicious. If a meeting is going to be live streamed, public has to be made aware of where they can observe it on the internet, how it can be viewed. So what constitutes a meeting? This is another thing that comes up frequently. Sometimes public bodies will say, well, this isn't a meeting, it's a work session. Well, under the law, call it what you want. If there is a quorum of public officials present, it's a meeting. Well, it's a work session because we're not voting on anything. We're just discussing things. It's a meeting under the open meetings law. It needs to have public notice, public attendance. It doesn't matter whether you're voting or not. Just the fact that you as a quorum have gathered to meet to discuss public business, that makes it a meeting. Some call it, well, it's a pre-board meeting. Again, not really a meeting. Subject to the open meetings law. Now, there are some terrible exceptions under the law, political caucus meetings where members of the same party can meet in private without any public notice. That's something that we're working to reform and address. We think that really guts the open meetings law and abuses it. So there are always exceptions to these rules. Meeting documents. We see this probably as one of the biggest abuses in the law. Meeting documents must be posted online at least 24 hours before a meeting occurs. Since 2011, there has been a requirement in the law to post meeting documents online. It astounds me that to this day, many years later, public bodies aren't doing it, claim to not know it's required. We strengthened this law in the past year or two, in that it's always been since 2011, you have to post online. The 24-hour requirement is new. There were some court cases that said, well, if you put it up an hour before the meeting, it's sufficient. There's really no requirement under the law otherwise. So we inserted this 24-hour requirement. This applies to all public bodies. Again, village board, town board, city council, planning board, school board, zoning board. Whatever documents are on your meeting agenda to be discussed should be posted online. And what I tell people to do is, whatever the board packet is, the packet of information that board members have in front of them, scan it and post it online. In my town in Amherst, New York, to their credit, they will scan and post 500 pages. A lot of places will post just a one-page agenda of meeting topics. That's insufficient under the law. Resolutions, contracts that you're approving, the public should be seeing that information. It's very hard to follow a meeting when you don't have access to the documents, and there's debate and discussion about the documents. So this is a significant part of the open meetings law. Every report we do, there seems to be a real lack of compliance with this. Meeting minutes or a recording must be posted online within 2 weeks of a meeting. This is relatively new as well. A lot of places post their meeting minutes, but until the past year or two, there was no requirement to post meeting minutes. Now there is. We don't like the fact that the law says meeting minutes or a recording. We take the position of why can't you do both? I don't like scrolling through a meeting video to try to find what's of interest to me. I like written meeting minutes. It's just easier to scroll through and find out what happened. But if you have the benefit of doing both, even better. There seems to be this thought that, well, we can't post meeting minutes within 2 weeks because they haven't been approved yet. There's no requirement in the law to approve minutes. You can post them and stamp draft on them and then approve them at your following meeting. There's no requirement to approve minutes. It's an okay practice to do, but you don't have to. And something needs to be posted online within 2 weeks so the public can know what happened. Executive sessions, another area with a lot of issues. They should not be scheduled in advance. You'll see this a lot right on the meeting agenda. It'll say there will be an executive session, which raises the question, well, when was that discussed? And who decided we were going to have an executive session? I mean, that shouldn't happen. I understand it's kind of a courtesy to let people know, okay, that may be helpful, but you shouldn't schedule an executive session in advance. It should be an item that's on the agenda, and then a motion is made by someone to go into executive session. And that motion has to occur in public. There are a lot of mistakes made on executive sessions, and I think a lot of it's just bad habits. You join a board and you hear these motions that are made over and over, and you just think that's okay. That's the way it's always been done. But a motion stating to discuss litigation does not comply with the law. You should state the name of the legal case. The public has a right to know. Just saying litigation is not enough. And I think all too often there is an executive session to discuss litigation when there doesn't need to be. If you as a board are just getting an update on the status of a legal matter, that can occur in public, and it should. There's no reason to do that behind closed doors. The only time to discuss litigation behind closed doors is if you're discussing legal strategy that you don't want the other side to know. But the truth is, board members shouldn't be involved in legal strategy. Leave that to the attorneys. So you have to say more than just litigation. Another one, executive session to discuss a personnel matter. Nowhere in the open meetings law is the word personnel even used. Insufficient under the law. You don't have to state the name, but let us know. Are you looking to discuss hiring someone for a position, disciplining someone? You can't just say personnel. And you also see to discuss collective bargaining negotiations or contract negotiations. If it's collective bargaining, you should state the name of the union. What union are you discussing? Contract negotiations, I don't know what that means. Does that mean, again, a collective bargaining agreement? Or is that some negotiation with a contract vendor that you're entering into, which really is, no reason to go into executive session for. So you have to be more specific when discussing these things. I see this a lot. In the statute, it says an executive session motion can be made for these things. So what a lot of places will do is they'll repeat this. And I've counted this in the past, but I forget what it is, but there's literally 17 different things in that motion. It could be a medical issue, a financial issue, promotion, demotion, discipline, suspension. I shouldn't have to guess, well, which one of these is the executive session motion for? So that is insufficient. There are cases, court decisions that say you can't just parrot what the statute says. See this a lot. Again, pick one or two of them. Be a little more specific than just throwing all of them out there. And basically, executive session should be rare and held for the right reasons. Just because you can hold an executive session doesn't mean that you have to. Believe it or not, you can discuss collective bargaining negotiations in public. You have the right to go in private, but you don't have to. You can discuss it in public. You can discuss a litigation issue in public. You have a right to do it in private, but you don't have to. So I think all too often there's a culture of secrecy in a lot of public bodies where they want, some public bodies will meet longer in private than they do in public. And, you know, that's just, that shouldn't happen. And I wish I saw more public officials objecting to an executive session. It happens, but pretty rarely. Well, why do we need an executive session? Why can't we discuss it in public? I wish more people would push back on that. So we have a new thing in the law about hybrid meetings. So you can now have a hybrid meeting if you're a public body where a majority of your members are present in person, but some participate remotely. You know, we found during the pandemic that remote meetings were pretty good. A lot of people were going online watching their local government meetings, and we want to continue that. So if your board is interested in doing a hybrid meeting, you have to adopt a local law or a resolution. You have to put forth procedures, written procedures as to, well, when can someone participate remotely? You know, in an emergency situation, an illness, out of town, whatever the case may be. You have to put something in writing which guides when members can participate remotely. If you're going to do a remote participation, you have to do it by video. If you're a board member, can't do it by audio only. And you have to allow, if you provide public comment at your meetings, you have to allow the public the ability to comment remotely as well as in person. Your meeting minutes have to reflect who participated remotely. So this is a new thing. More and more places are kind of adopting these rules. Just wanted to highlight that that's something that's been going on. And a recording of a remote meeting must be posted online within 5 business days. And you have to maintain those recordings for at least 5 years. So let's talk about freedom of information law stuff. Basically, all government records are presumed to be available to the public. We start with that presumption. If it's a record that a government official has, we assume that the public has a right to it. There are exceptions under the law as to things that can be withheld and not disclosed, but we start with that premise. And the freedom of information law applies again to pretty much public bodies. Again, not necessarily to nonprofit organizations. And interestingly, the judiciary and the state legislature exempt themselves from the freedom of information law. You can still get some things regarding court cases and some things from the legislature, but a lot of things you can't. Those that make the rules carve out exemptions for themselves. Every government agency has to have a designated record access officer. And that should be, you know, listed somewhere on your website or something to let the public know, well, who is the record access officer? Typically, it's the town clerk, the city clerk for municipalities. But, you know, it can be someone else, and, you know, other government agencies don't have the town clerk or city clerk. Basically, the record access officer is the person responsible for processing FOIL requests. And there also has to be a designated appeals officer where you can appeal any denials of your request. It's oftentimes the town attorney, village attorney, city attorney, but that can vary as well. Under the Freedom of Information Law, you can request a record. And there, that is defined, it's pretty broad, basically written documents, it can be videos, photos, maps, drawings, computer tapes. So it covers a lot of things that you can request under the Freedom of Information Law. And there are certain timelines. So when you make your FOIL request, typically, you can do it by email, you can do it in person, it should be in writing. You can make a FOIL request verbally, although, I don't recommend it because, it's hard to follow up and document. So you should do it in writing. Some places will try to get you to fill out their specific form, and it's really much as how much you want to get into a fight about it. They really aren't supposed to require a specific form. Sometimes I push back on that. I send an email and they say, well, thank you for your email, but fill this form out. And I say, well, the form is just me repeating what I put in my email. Why do I have to do that? Sometimes it's just not worth the fight. Fill out the form. But they're not supposed to require a specific form. I typically do it by email. Within 5 business days, they're supposed to acknowledge your request. We see this a lot, that it's the delay, they don't acknowledge it within 5 days. And basically they have 20 days, business days from their acknowledgement to provide the information to you or put forth a deadline as to when they think they will have it. This, unfortunately, lately we've seen some horrific responses where they say, well, we'll get back to you in 6 months. That's not how the law is supposed to work. They're supposed to, have a reasonable deadline or date. A lot of times they don't even give you a date. They'll just say, we'll get back to you. After 30 days, if you haven't received a response or your information, you can file an appeal, which is just an administrative appeal to that FOIL appeals officer saying, hey, it's been, 30 days. I haven't either gotten an acknowledgement, or I haven't been provided the information, or I haven't been provided a date to receive the information. Sometimes filing that appeal will prompt them to get going, not always. And they have 10 business days to respond to your appeal. So there are a bunch of things that are exempt from the Freedom of Information Law. I won't go through all these. Well, you can take a look at the statute. There's some pretty common ones that they will typically refer to, but they can't just typically blanketly deny your request. Your request is denied. They have to give you a reason. And sometimes, even if there are things in a document that they can withhold, that doesn't mean they withhold the entire document. They're supposed to go through it, black out sections that they believe need to be blacked out, although I've seen some ridiculous responses where I get 20 pages where every single word is blacked out. I mean, it's just hard to believe. You've all been dealing with this, I know, and I'm sure we'll get some interesting questions. But there are a bunch of exemptions under the law, which we can certainly get into more in the questions. So I'll just move forward. They can charge you for your FOIL requests. Typically it's 25 cents a page. What I typically do is there's no request for electronic documents. So in my FOIL request, I will say, please provide this information to me electronically, meaning that if they can scan something and email it to you, not doing an old-fashioned photocopy, they don't charge you the 25 cents a page. I've seen some places where they try to charge you for the time that they spend in processing your request and for copying pages. It's supposed to be one or the other. They can't charge you 25 cents a page and charge you fees for, staff time in getting the information. It's one or the other. And they can only charge you for staff time if it's going to take more than 2 hours to get the information. I haven't seen it a lot, but it does happen sometimes. And I usually put in my FOIL request, if it's going to cost more than $20, let me know. Don't go make all these copies and then send me a bill for $500, which I have had happen. Don't waste your time and my time. I'm not paying $500. Don't make $500 worth of copies. So I put a kind of a limit in my FOIL request saying, if it's going to be more than that, let me know and let's talk and maybe we can figure out some other way. Sometimes they'll send it to me on a CD and they can charge you for the cost of the CD. Now, CDs don't typically cost $20. I've seen some place that, well, we got to charge you $20 for the CD. Well, why is that? It doesn't cost $20 for the CD. So there are some issues with fees. Some best practices that I think local governments can follow, or town clerks, or things that you can advocate for as a citizen. I think it's helpful to have a notify me link on websites where people can sign up to get email notification of meetings. Some places have this, some places don't. Although the law requires you have to post documents at least 24 hours in advance, you can do more than that. Most board members get their meeting packet 2 or 3 or 4 days in advance. So it always baffles me as to why it can't be posted at the same time board members get their packet. 24 hours is woefully insufficient, but that is the law. A lot of places require people to sign up to speak. There's really nothing in the law that requires people to be a resident to speak at a meeting. There's nothing that requires people to identify themselves. So it's just not a practice that is necessary. I know a lot of town clerks like to have, I guess, documentation. Maybe it makes speaking a little more orderly, but you shouldn't demand that people give their name and full address. You can just have people, or some places will want to know what you're going to talk about. Well, why do I need to get into all that? Some places make you sign up, 24 hours, 40 hours in advance, which I think is ridiculous. Basically, public comment time. Someone wants to make a public comment, step up to the microphone. You don't have to demand that they give their name and address. We talked about posting draft meeting minutes. A lot of places, when people do give public comments, I notice that they don't recognize it in any way. I mean, people take the time to come to a meeting, share some thoughts. The least you can do is put it in the meeting minutes. Again, you don't have to identify people by name, but a resident spoke about, concerns about garbage pickup, something. You should have information regarding the right to file a FOIL request posted in a visible place on your website. Give some people information on how to do it. Where does it go? As we said earlier, you don't have to require a particular form. Communicate regularly and timely regarding your FOIL requests. Some places aren't good at giving you information on how to file your appeal. A lot of places don't know, public bodies don't realize you're supposed to send a copy of all the appeal documents to the New York State Committee on Open Government. So the appeal request, your response, should be sent to the Committee on Open Government. That's a requirement by the Open Meetings Law. But many places don't do that or are not aware of it. So basically, the New York Coalition for Open Government is here to help. There's our website, my email and phone number. I'm always happy to answer any questions. Follow us on Facebook. If someone wants a copy of these slides, I can certainly send them to you as well. So after this, basically after this meeting, I can email the slides out to everyone that registered. So that's what I had for my slides. And let me stop sharing my screen.
There were some questions in the chat.
Oh no. Am I still here? All right, so.
Michelle already answered a whole bunch of them, though. So,
Okay.
Michelle, you just want to
Um,
basically kind of feed him some questions that you think need to follow
Yep.
up.
I think the good one was, what is an elected official's legal obligation, if any, to not discuss what was discussed in an executive session?
That is an interesting question. Robert Freeman, who was the prior executive director on the Committee on Open Government, who had 40 years of experience doing this, he always said that there is nothing in the law that prevents people from disclosing what was discussed in executive session. He was big on that, but there may be policies. A lot of school boards have policies that you shouldn't discuss what is said in an executive session. So while you may not be violating the law, you may be violating policy of your public body. And there was a school board member in Buffalo who was removed from office for disclosing what was discussed in an executive session. So it is a problematic, dicey area. I think the first question is always, well, do we need to have an executive session? I think there should be less executive sessions, more pushback on elected officials on whether you should hold an executive session. So I don't know if I have a good answer. I guess there are conflicting opinions. And on one hand, where there's nothing in the law that precludes it, there may be a school board policy, town board policy that does preclude it. It's probably going to annoy a lot of your colleagues that there's somewhat of an understanding that what we discuss here is supposed to be private. I think more importantly, if you are in an executive session as a member of a public body, don't let them steer off course. Well, wait a minute, we're getting beyond what the executive session was supposed to be for. And try to be somewhat of a police person about whether executive sessions are proper or not. I wish I had a better answer. Anything else?
I'm reading through, there was a question about, can a group get a quorum by conducting remote, counting remote participants? That has to do with live stream. Maybe Paul can explain that a little bit more, the difference with the live streaming provision.
So some places are meeting, most places now are meeting in person. We advocate that even if you're doing an in-person meeting, you should live stream that meeting. So members of the public that aren't able to attend can watch it live and post a recording of that afterwards so people can watch it anytime. But in-person meetings are one thing. Now we have this hybrid meeting option, which we discussed earlier. So if your public body adopts a resolution or a local law to do hybrid meetings, you can do so. But a quorum of your members must still be present in person. So not everybody can be remote unless we go back to some sort of state of emergency again. So it has to either be in person or a hybrid with the majority of your members present in person. Anne Marie has her hand up unless you have more chat questions.
There's another.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Anne Marie.
I was just actually, I wanted to get an answer to what Howard Owens put up regarding a school board received a report on a school spending from a consultant. They wouldn't provide us an unredacted copy of the report, which was discussed in a public meeting, calling the report interagency communication. He wanted any thoughts. Michelle did respond, but I think it's still confusing to me. What is considered an inter or intra-agency document? And I can't tell you how many times this has been utilized at school board meetings when I actually have a copy of the record that I filed for, where they tell other people they can't get because of this.
Yeah,
So,
this is a big one. Probably the biggest exemption used on FOIL requests is, well, we don't have to disclose it because it's an interagency communication. And basically, emails, letters between board members or other officials don't have to be disclosed. What has to be disclosed are policy documents, final documents, So they use this a lot for things like consultant reports. If they hire a consultant to do something, they push back saying, well, it's an interagency communication. We hired this consultant to provide us as an agency information, and it's not, subject to FOIL. Again, you can push back on that. There may be parts of it that can be withheld, but usually not all of it. And it sounded like Mr. Owens got, some parts of it, but lots of it were redacted. This is a continuing problem under the law, this interagency exception. And I looked, and pretty much every state has the same exemption. Now, even though you typically can't get emails and things like that, some places will give it to you. There's no harm in asking. But there are some that will seek to withhold based on this exemption. And it's a tough one because it's pretty broad. It covers a lot of communications. And a lot of times, you have to litigate it, which again is, so in Buffalo, there were, a lot of the bill stuff was being secret. And there was a engineer report that the county did, documenting why the Bill Stadium why you needed a new stadium and couldn't repair the new one. So a news reporter said, well, I want to see what this study says. It's an engineering study. And they refused to release it, saying, it was interagency. And then it was even more crazy that it would threaten public safety by letting people know the crumbling condition of the facility. It was really outrageous. And they had to go to court and sue. And some of it was redacted at the end of the day, but a lot of it, the redactions got overturned. And they know that, they know if we're going to just black it all out, sue us. The chances of you suing and being successful, unfortunately, are hard. Emily.
Hold
Gotta
on,
unmute
sorry, I had to unmute. So I had two questions. Maybe you answered, I put them in the chat. One was, what has to be included in the agenda packet? I find with the Red Hook Town Board that they always seem to be talking about things that aren't actually in the packet. They'll talk about something, they'll put something in the packet that's 5 pages, but they'll talk about something that's on page 19, that kind of thing.
Yeah, in my opinion, the entire packet, but basically what the law says, it'll specifically mention resolutions and some other things, but basically it says anything subject to disclosure under FOIL that is scheduled to be discussed, during the meeting should be posted online. So I view that to mean the entire board packet should be posted online. I see some places picking and choosing. Well, we just have to post resolutions. No, that's not what the law says. And you'll see there's a supervisor report, but it's not sometimes they don't have them in writing, but when they do, it should be posted online. So I read the law as requiring all documents that board members have that are being discussed should be posted.
Okay, and then thank you, Paul, could you just reiterate the rules around getting to quorum from the remote participants? Like if you need a quorum of 5 people and 4 of them are present in the room, can you get to quorum with the 5th who's not? And can you get to quorum? Well, okay, I'll leave it at that.
I believe, for a hybrid meeting, the quorum has to be in person. So, if you're a 5-member board, you have to have 3 in person. If you're a 7-member board, you got to have 4 in person. So if you're running a hybrid meeting, the quorum has to be in person. Those participating remotely don't count towards the in-person quorum, but they do count, for votes and everything else.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Carolyn.
Hi, Paul. Thank you for doing this.
Sure.
A question on the quorum. I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but it doesn't matter where they're meeting. If there is a quorum, they cannot discuss public business. Is that correct?
Well, if there's a quorum of members present, right? So, a little bit of a gray line is like training events or retreats. You couldn't have a quorum of members can attend a training session, go to a
Right.
retreat, so long as, they're not discussing public business. I mean, you can go to learn and obtain information, but anytime, a quorum of members are present and they're conducting public business, they're not at a party, they're socializing. So you have to be a quorum that's conducting business, that's subject to the open meetings law.
Could I just give you an example? There was a 5-member board that was having a dispute with the local chamber of commerce. I walked into a diner and 3 of those board members were sitting with the chamber president having lunch. And I was pretty sure they were discussing the issues that they disagreed on. I just walked over to them and said, "It's very nice to see you here. I hope you're not discussing public business." So, but I mean, those kind of things happen all the time. There's always ways of skirting around that quorum issue. And
Especially if those 3 members are of the same political party, that
Right.
could be a caucus meeting.
right. Their position was that they weren't at an official meeting and they were able to discuss it. And, I told them I think they were wrong. And
Yeah, I would agree they were wrong.
there's always a new trick up their sleeve.
All right. Sonia,
Thank you.
sure. You gotta unmute yourself.
I wanted to mention from the display card you had that when the city clerk is the clerk who responds, it's not necessary to have an attorney look into whether they give you the whether they deny or not your
Well,
FOIA.
some places, as a matter of policy, run all FOIL requests by their attorney. They can do that.
I remember in your card, it was if there's an appeal, the attorney looks into it.
Well,
Makes
even before the appeal, they can have their attorney look at the FOIL request.
And she pointed out, and I did not mention it in my FOIL, bring that issue, but she says, and she made a point, the attorney is not required for him to look at it. In that FOIL, it was.
I mean, if you're foiling like meeting minutes or something, there shouldn't be no need to involve the attorney. But if it's something, otherwise, they may consult their attorney.
Well, that FOIL I was requesting was pertinent and triggered by the fact what the attorney was saying. And to this day, they have not responded to it, and they know why I was requesting it. The bottom line, it seems to me, I know I and many other people will request, have acknowledge, will send it out. They don't even get an acknowledgement. This is a joke the way it currently is in this state. And what is it, Connecticut, Massachusetts, when the citizen doesn't get a response, for example, FOIL, they have an attorney who will be advocate on just this. We don't have that in this state, and we should have that because of some of the complaints we hear.
I hear you. Andre.
Good morning. I often observe legislative committee meetings and Anchorage assembly meetings, and the use of smartphones by the members during meetings has increased a lot, especially this legislative session that we're in right now.
So are you joining us all the way from Alaska?
Yes.
Wow.
I was excited. I grew up on Long Island, so I feel it's family here in New York, right?
Yeah.
So I was wondering, has anybody addressed the ubiquitous use of smartphones during meetings by public officials.
You mean as far as them what, not paying attention and looking at their phones, or how so?
Well, during a public meeting, the public is aware of who's talking to who's discussing what with whom, and what is being said. But all of a sudden, when public officials are texting or whatever they're doing on their smartphones, the public isn't privy to what's being said or done. So does that violate at all the public meetings? Well, for New York, I guess.
Well, it would probably fall under New York's interagency communication. Again, you can request emails or text messages between elected officials, and sometimes they will provide them.
But this isn't, I mean, we don't know. It could be a lobbyist. I mean, I'm thinking, any special interest can be providing questions to ask during those public meetings. So it's up to supposition as to what's being done. So has that been addressed yet?
It's come up a little bit, and it's come up in the way, also what's problematic, there are these apps where your communications disappear. So it has come out that, some public officials at the national and state level are using apps to send messages to each other for which no record is ever kept. And I know some communities have passed legislation to prevent the use of those apps. We haven't gotten to that yet in New York State, but there are several public officials in New York. I think it's, the WhatsApp or some other apps where there's no record of it. And that's, pretty intentional and purposeful to get around FOIL requests and shouldn't be allowed. So it's not something that's been addressed yet, but it seems to be coming up more and more.
Great, thank you.
Corey, I saw you had your hand up, and maybe you put it down.
Just a quick comment. Look, during a proceeding, you can't use your phone if you're giving testimony under oath in certain circumstances. I know I'm being recorded, so if you see that there's testimony under oath, and yet that person seems to be influenced, if not engaged in a conversation, it should be brought out immediately on that same open record. And then, among other things, you can, some people say I tilt at windmills, but you could tilt at certain government agencies that are supposed to regulate that, or would very much be concerned if somebody was giving testimony under oath or sworn, basically a sworn hearing, and on their cellular phone. I know if I was giving a deposition or taking a deposition, I would ask that phone become part of the record. So that's my one.
Although most meetings, you're not doing sworn testimony. Maybe at some public hearings, I don't know.
It becomes a public record though if they're using or relying upon it in basically answering the public. That would be my position, but
Sure.
people disagree.
Howard.
Hey, how's it going? Hey,
Good.
Really fascinating conversation. I very much enjoyed it. I put this in chat, but I just wanted to point out, because you talked about policies related to what board members discussing outside of executive session. That was one of my questions.
Right.
And something you said prompted me to remember, in 2018, I did a whole series of stories about school board policies. Some are more explicit than others, that prohibit their school board members from discussing anything outside of the meeting. They are not, if there's a public agenda item, and for the example, you rarely see discussions about the budget. So if you want to ask a school board meeting after a school board member after the meeting, why'd you support the budget? They're not allowed to discuss it with you by policy. Alexander's policy is like very explicit. We speak with one voice, no dissent allowed. And
if I could just jump in on that, I've seen those policies. I disagree with those policies. A lot of school boards have a policy that say only the school board president can speak for the board to the media. I think that's BS. You are an elected school board official, And, you have every right, a First Amendment right to speak about your position on issues. And any school board member that doesn't want to talk is just hiding behind that. But your more independent rabble rouser school board members certainly don't pay any attention to it. But
As far as I can,
it seems to exist more on school boards than anywhere else, that policy.
right. And there are, I've never, there's 8 or 9 school districts in our county. There's no rabble rousers. There's nobody that'll break the policy. We can never get anybody to comment on anything. And Alexander's policy is only the superintendent, at least it used to be, they've changed superintendents. Only the superintendent could speak to the media. No, not even the board president can speak to the media.
All right, and some cities have now adopted policies that only the chief of police or the public information officer can speak to the media. Don't try to interview, patrol officers or anything else. Again, it's just all an effort to clamp it down, restrict access.
Well, one thing about employees, I mean, there's actual case law, you may be aware of this, that give employees First Amendment right to speak to the media. So you can't actually tell a police officer that they can't talk to a reporter. So I don't have a lot of success though reminding police officers that they can't be muffled.
Well, keep up the good fight. I love your articles.
Oh, thank you.
Michelle.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of discussion in the chat about enforcement, and I've been trying to kind of summarize in the chat our efforts on what we're doing, some specific with the fees and the different things that we are pursuing to try to get more teeth in the law.
Great. New York is terrible as far as enforcement of the open meetings law and FOIL law. Other states, as was mentioned earlier, they have independent bodies that can enforce the law, mediate disputes. In New York, we have the Committee on Open Government, which is a great resource, great opinions. They have no enforcement power. Your only recourse in New York is to file a lawsuit, which is ridiculous. And when you file a lawsuit to try to get attorney fees, it's very hard in New York. We're trying to change that, all right, well, if our only option is to sue, we should at least make it very easy to have a public body that violates the law pay for your attorney fees. We don't have that in New York. So those are things that we are pushing for. Other states, it's a criminal offense if you violate the law. You can be fined. We don't have any of that here in New York. You are on your own. Not even the Attorney General's office will help you here, which in other states they will. The so-called people's lawyer in New York State will not advocate for the people in any way in open government issues. So it's shocking when people find out that, well, we're the Empire State, we're New York, we lead the nation. It is not true when it comes to open government. We were the last state in the country to pass an open meetings law in 1976. Alabama did it in 1916. It's just shocking how far behind the times we are. So big part of our effort in the coalition is coming together. We're getting bills introduced. We're going to have to ratchet up public pressure to get some of these things passed. And we hope, more of you will join us. Anne Marie, you have your hand up.
Actually, if you could let Carol go ahead of me, because I have a few questions and
All right.
I don't want to monopolize time.
Carol King, one of my favorite artists. What is your question?
Hey, so you say the AG won't help. What about the public advocate? Any role here?
What public advocate?
No public advocate? in New
There
York?
is no public advocate in New York.
No longer?
Well, what do you mean? There's the Committee on Open Government, they'll issue.
I guess
opinions.
I guess, okay, first of all, let me just say, I am a longtime New York City resident, no longer in New York.
Oh, the
but
public
that's why-
advocate in New York City you're referring to.
Exactly, the what Mark Green used to have.
Yeah, I mean, funny enough, when de Blasio was the public advocate before he became mayor, he did a report on how poor compliance was with the Freedom of Information law. And then, of course, when he became mayor, he was terrible at compliance with the Freedom of Information law. But the public advocate, other than maybe issuing a report on occasion, which I don't think they've done for years, I don't think they typically get involved in these issues either, not that I'm aware of. And Marie.
In regards to what Carol stated about the public advocate, there is one in the state of New York in the state attorney general's office. As I was sent to them when I was doing research on a specific topic, I was sent to them. They couldn't help me, but there supposedly is an advocate. Just to mention that, but I did have a few questions. I can't say if you covered everything or not, but you addressed about the quorum must be present for the hybrid meetings. But if the town agrees to do hybrid meetings based on law, must that be available to everyone or just public officials?
Well, the hybrid meeting is so the public officials, some of them can participate remotely, but when you do that, the public has to be given the opportunity to participate remotely as well.
Okay, another thing you addressed was the documents, that when you do an appeal, that those documents go to the Committee on Open Government, but isn't that only for denials?
Well, it's
So
only if you're appealing, whatever, your denial or you didn't get all the information. If you file an appeal, the public agency is supposed to send a copy of everything to the Committee on Open Government.
So I guess what I'm asking is, so in appealing a FOIL that's been denied, my understanding was that only if they denied me, the appeal officer denied me, only those ones go to the Committee on Open Government. And what you're saying is they all go because they've all been appealed.
Well, that's a good question. I'll have to take a look. I thought all of them went. Maybe it's just those that are denied.
Okay, thank you. So you also addressed about how when posting documents online for meetings, it's not okay for them just to post the resolution. They must also post the documents that go with that resolution.
Right.
Our municipality does not do that. I've recently foiled for a grant that they decided they were going to match because I have documentation showing that the grant itself has not yet been approved. So in other words, they haven't even decided that the organization is going to get a grant and the town has already matched the money, of which they don't even know how much they're getting. So I agree with you there that everything should be on there for us to view. I also like to know, can you foil the New York State Department of State?
Yes, you can.
Okay. Also too, is there a list of documents that like someone put out a list that said these are the documents you must post online for meetings?
Not that I'm aware of. There have been, like just the other day, the state assembly passed, a law, but it hasn't been, enacted yet, that annual report should be posted online. I think budget information may be required to be posted online, but other than that, I don't know if there's specific stuff required to be posted.
Okay, so I was just at my board meeting and I requested that all the vouchers be posted. Now they stated that, there's thousands and thousands of vouchers. And when it was time for me to speak again, I clarified that I was requesting the report, the monthly report that they have to approve for the vouchers, because it's not just that they're saying there's a report, they're actually having to authorize the expenditures, which are through a report. I know because I foiled and got those reports. I'm trying to get as much of the stuff that I foil for available to the public in these meetings. They did say they had a list of what they were allowed to put online. That's why I asked if there is such a list.
I'm not aware of such a list. Now, municipalities, public bodies are supposed to keep a subject matter list internally of documents that there is a subject matter list that should be posted or made available of what documents they have. But I don't know that those documents themselves necessarily need to be posted.
Okay, and then one final question. You talked about the time frame that they need to inform the public about a scheduled meeting. But you didn't, I don't know if there's anything in the law that says that they must give some type of notice or reason for the cancellation of meetings. So we had several budget meetings scheduled for our municipality, and they canceled every single budget session. So there was actually no budget discussion until it came up to the public hearing to approve the budget. So I guess my question, like I said, is there anything in the law that says you must cancel 72 hours prior? You must have a legitimate reason to cancel. Could you answer that?
No,
Please.
not that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you. And thanks for all you do here.
Oh, sure. Michelle.
There was a question that was sent to me and it said, do we provide a service to review town board policies to assess compliance? And maybe you can speak to the reports and how we really are the only ones really reviewing compliance.
And one of the frustrating things in New York is, not only are there very limited enforcement options, there's no one other than our group that monitors compliance with the law. I mean, no one checks. It's like having, no speeding enforcement on the throughway, which, may sound like a great idea, but reality is probably not. But there is no one monitoring compliance with the open meetings law, free information law. We try to do that. We're just a group of volunteers, no paid staff. We do that as volunteers a couple times a year. And every report we do is just unfortunately dismal as far as compliance with the law. But we're happy to assist. I've had occasionally an elected official will reach out to me and say, hey, can you look this over? And, are we doing, the right thing or what we can do? So I'm always happy to assist any public bodies that are interested. We do post all our reports on our website online. I think if people look at those, they can learn from them. But always helpful, always willing to help public bodies as well. Ken just posted a question in the chat, but I didn't see it all. You want to ask your question, Ken?
Hi, yeah, I just unmuted myself. We have, you mentioned the OML applies to zoning boards and what did I put? I gotta read my own thing. Zoning boards and planning boards. In our town, both are chaired by a board approved chairman, and the boards and themselves are made up of just private citizens. So there's not really an elected board member on these committees. Still subject to OML?
Yeah. By law, they're public bodies. They have the power, to do things. So they are subject to the open meetings law.
Okay.
Howard, I don't know if you have another question.
Yeah, just real quick, do you have a document you could share that you use in these audits? I mean, I'd like to review all the websites for all our public bodies and produce a story about it. I'm just wondering if you'd have a document you can share in your process.
In our reports, we kind of walk through what we're looking at. On the slides I just did today, I kind of have, best practices, some of those are what the law requires minimally, but then going beyond that. So if you take a look at some of our reports, we walk through what it is that we're evaluating.
Okay, I was just wondering if there's like a easy to use checklist I could just work off of.
Well, I can send you something. Yeah. We typically I give our members kind of a checklist sheet to go through and say, hey, take a look. Is this here or not? So I can certainly send you that.
Yeah, I'd love to have that. Thank you.
Sure. Annie.
Hi, thank you for this. This has been great. I went to college in the Bronx. I went to Manhattan College and covered NYPD for my college newspaper. 20 years ago. I lived in Westchester County and Fairfield County. Currently, I'm living in North Carolina, but I'm looking to possibly get a job in journalism that would be covering more New York and possibly nationally. So this has been very helpful. And another hat I wore, I'll just quickly say, I briefly worked for a New York State Senator in 2011. So in your outreach efforts, you may already be doing this, but just two quick thoughts I had were when I recall when I worked for the state senator, I didn't receive any sort of FOIL training really at all. And I was his director of communications. So you might want to reach out to the powers that be there. I'm sure you probably already do, and for the journalists, you may be wanting to look more closely at press releases and staffing around that. And also for undergrads, when I was at Manhattan College, at the time, the communications was housed under the College of Mount St. Vincent. And I don't recall any sort of open government education, but things have come quite a long way since then and with technology. So thank you so much.
Thanks for your comments. And it is shocking that there is no training requirement for government officials regarding, open government laws. We, as an attorney, I'm required to complete, continuing education classes, doctors, dentists, so many professions, massage therapists, whatever your profession is, you have to complete, continuing education classes, but we don't require the same of elected officials or government officials. And it's just shocking, again, the lack of knowledge. So one of the things that we are pushing for is mandatory training. School board members, when they're newly elected, are required to do some initial training. Zoning board members, planning board members are required to complete training. Members of an industrial development agency are, but again, elected officials in general not. And I had the experience also one time of a reporter coming to one of our press conferences in the early days, and that reporter had no idea what the Freedom of Information Law was, and I was just blown away. Now, I think she was a recently graduated student, but nonetheless, how could someone graduate with a journalism degree and not know anything about FOIL? It was kind of shocking. So you're right, you make some good points. A lot of this is, I think a lot of it is bad habits, bad customs, and people just don't know better. So there's a lot of education and training that needs to occur. Anyone else? Sonia?
I wanted to make a comment. What I'm hearing, it sounds like our elected officials, representatives, they're neglecting their job. They're to serve us, and yet the basic laws being followed are not being followed. And when we point it out to them and they don't respond, there's something very, very wrong. And I have said this for a long time. I remember when I was growing up in the 50s, New York was the empire state. Well, I've said in recent decades, it went from empire to vampire. This is the truth. You listen to these comments and this is the truth. Basic following the law. And there's the other comment I make. No one is above the law. And yet when people are not responding according to the law, it's like, hey, they're above the law. This is very, very wrong.
Yeah. Anne Marie, do you have another question?
Yes, what was the date or year that the law was put in requiring that they post the meeting audio?
Posting the meeting audio, I believe, was 2021, like November of 2021, I believe.
Okay, I also like to inform that I am a former school board member. And when I got on the board, we were given minimal training. It was required training, but it was done by ABOCES. They gave you a whole packet of stuff. But I actually took the initiative and went to other trainings to learn the portions of my job better, make sure that I was following the laws in when voting on things such as I took a training on claims auditing done by the state comptroller's office. And that was to understand what the red flags are, what we should be doing differently, and that you bring that back to the board. I think the other public officials, such as municipalities, not including school districts, they should be mandated to attend some basic training. I think definitely training on how to do a budget. I've watched them, new people come in and they just follow along with who's ever been there as though what they're doing is okay. I also like to see them learn how to do a public hearing, especially when it comes to local laws. We had in 2021, we had 4 local laws that were repealed by our municipality, and they held no public hearings. When they realized they made a mistake a year and a half later, they tried to negate them. And I had to explain to them and provide documentation that they couldn't do it that way because they had already certified to the state that they held those public hearings in order to repeal those laws. But they still went ahead and negated them and went backwards. But in essence, per the New York State Department of State, they specifically pointed out there's only 2 things you can do with the local law. You can repeal it and you can put in a new one. They'd already repealed it. It was wrong how they did it. And they said, just have them put in a new law. But instead of putting a new law, they're going backwards. And they said, those laws don't exist anymore. They repealed them. So just wanted to point out a few things. Thank you.
Thank you. Andre, or is it Andrea? I'm not sure.
Oh, it's Andre, you're right. I just want to recommend, the courts are part of the equation here. And back in 2008, before the VP nomination, I put in for Sarah Palin's emails way back when. And it took about 3 years, a little bit more than 3 years to finally get them. But what I did was I exhausted the appeals, the administrative appeals, and went to the courts. And I think I would recommend anybody, if they could find a pro bono lawyer, to go to the courts. We went all the way to the Supreme Court, and you know that we have 3 branches of government, and the courts are very important in the checks and balances and getting those laws changed.
Yeah.
So I would recommend anybody to go to the courts.
We do. Unfortunately, it's not an easy process in New York, but that is something that we've been working on. And we have dedicated attorney members who have actually done cases pro bono with the hopes of getting attorney fees. And I think we're going to do more of that, but we certainly need some better laws to assist the court process as well. We should probably get wrapping things up here. Any final questions? Thank you, Michelle, for watching the chat. So I will send out an email to everyone with a copy of these slides. I'll also put in the email, if you're interested in being added to our coalition email list, let me know. I don't want to just assume and put people on the list, but for those of you that are interested, we'll add you to our email list so you can keep up with our efforts. We encourage people to become a member. To become a paid member of our group is $20 a year. You know, and your membership fees just help us do things. We don't have any foundation funding or any paid staff, so it's completely a volunteer effort. But thank you everyone for attending. It was great discussion. I always learn from some of these questions. There's a couple of questions you guys hit me with that I got to go back now and take a look to make sure I'm answering them correctly. So
we also have some other subcommittees. So if you have a specific interest, whether it be PR, open meeting law, or FOIL law, we have separate subcommittees. We generally do all of our meetings on Thursdays. So if anybody's interested, reach out to us.
yeah. All right. Thanks a lot. Take care.